There are lines a woman once awakened will never allow to be crossed again. This isn't born from bitterness or from a hardened heart, but from a profound clarity that settles so deep within her soul that negotiation becomes impossible. These boundaries are invisible to those still asleep, those still living through borrowed identities. But to her, they form a sacred territory, a sovereign space no one may enter uninvited. What really happens in that moment of a woman's true awakening? It's not a flash of lightning, not a cinematic explosion of revelation. It's quieter than that. It's the subtle hum of the soul remembering itself. It begins as a faint discomfort with the old roles she used to play, a whisper that says, something here no longer fits. She can't quite name it at first, but the whisper grows louder until it fills every corner of her being. It's not a rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's not defiance against others. It's a homecoming. A quiet cellular recalibration begins, a deep sorting process unfolding in the background of her life. Slowly she starts to feel with unshakable certainty where her energy ends and the expectations of others begin. The world that once blurred her edges begins to sharpen. She learns to distinguish the melody of her own soul from the noise of what was imposed upon her. And as this awakening deepens, something ancient within her reclaims its voice. She realizes that she has lived much of her life in service to stories that were never hers. She was told to be soft but not too soft, ambitious but not threatening, nurturing but not needy. She performed these roles flawlessly because she was told that was love. But in the quiet, she sees the truth. She was praised not for who she was, but for how well she disappeared into who others needed her to be. In psychology, Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self, distinct from all the masks and expectations. For the awakened woman, this isn't theory. It's lived truth. A natural frontier emerges where once there was only porous vulnerability. Where she once begged to be seen, she now simply is. She no longer explains her worth. She embodies it. For years, most women try to set boundaries, only to find themselves exhausted by the endless battle to defend them. But the awakened woman operates differently. She no longer sets boundaries. She is the boundary. It's not something she declares. It's something she radiates. Her energy itself becomes a statement of what will and will not be allowed. This transformation doesn't come with dramatic speeches or confrontations. It unfolds in quiet sanctuaries, in her breath, her stillness, her reflection. Each morning, she meets her own eyes in the mirror and sees a truth that no one else can define. Before, she saw 1,000 versions of herself: the perfect mother, the patient partner, the dutiful daughter, the reliable friend. Now she simply sees herself, and that encounter changes everything. Once you have truly seen your own reflection, you can never go back to playing roles that were never yours. You've crossed a threshold that can never be uncrossed. The first line she will never again let be crossed concerns the very definition of her being. She no longer permits others to write the script of who she is supposed to be. Jung spoke of the persona, the social mask we wear to survive, to fit into a world that rewards conformity. But for many women, that mask wasn't chosen. It was assigned. From childhood, they were cast in roles they never auditioned for, taught to perform characters written by others, their families, their culture, their partners, in plays they never agreed to. For years, maybe decades, she gave an Oscar-worthy performance, until one day her body whispered no more. Her spirit refused to go on stage. The breakdown that followed was not a collapse. It was a breakthrough. In the rubble of that shattered identity, she finally discovered the authentic fragments of her true self. She realized the woman she had been trying to be was a ghost, a fabrication stitched together from her mother's unhealed wounds, her partner's desires, her children's needs, and society's rulebook. But nowhere in that costume could her soul be found. So she begins the sacred work of tearing it away, layer by layer. And yes, it hurts. Because when a woman decides to return to herself, the world rarely applauds. Family and friends who once adored her performance often meet her authenticity with confusion or anger. They ask, "What happened to you?" as though her awakening were a sickness to be cured. But she understands now. Dysfunctional systems depend on everyone playing their assigned part. The moment one person stops performing, the entire play begins to unravel. Still, she stands firm, because she knows this rebellion is not destruction, it's resurrection. She no longer exists to be the supporting actress in someone else's story. She will not contort her soul to make others comfortable. This boundary is absolute. She doesn't need to announce it, argue for it, or justify it. She simply lives it. There are moments, of course, when the old programming tries to pull her back, when familiar voices whisper, "You've changed," when the urge to please stirs again, but something fundamental has shifted. Where there was once an automatic yes, there is now a sacred pause. She's learned the power of that pause, that holy space between the world's request and her response. In that breath, she finds her truth. In that stillness, she meets her soul. And from there, she answers not as the woman they need her to be, but as the woman she is. And this is the quiet power of awakening. It doesn't make her louder. It makes her clearer. It doesn't make her harder. It makes her whole. Those who once relied on her compliance feel her absence like an earthquake. But she is not being cruel. She is simply returning to herself. The woman who once asked, "Is it okay if I," now moves with quiet certainty. The woman who once waited for permission now gives herself her own blessing. She is not angry. She is awake. And that awakening becomes her protection, her compass, her power. She no longer begs for understanding. She no longer defends her choices. She no longer fights to be seen, because she knows that true recognition begins within. And when that happens, when she finally recognizes herself, the world begins to shift around her. The people, the patterns, the energies that once drained her begin to fall away naturally, not because she pushed them away, but because they no longer match her frequency. Her awakening becomes the silent earthquake that rearranges everything. She has entered a new season, one where peace is power, and self-respect is non-negotiable. And in that sacred space, she finally begins to understand what freedom truly means. The second line that the awakened woman will never again allow to be crossed is the one that protects her from emotional invasion disguised as love. For most of her life, she was told that to love deeply meant to carry the pain of others. That empathy meant merging completely, feeling every wound, absorbing every emotion, rescuing every soul in crisis. She thought this was compassion, but it was self-erasure. Carl Jung identified this as participation, mystique, a state where the boundaries between two people dissolve, where one absorbs the emotional weight that rightfully belongs to the other. Many women have been praised for this kind of absorption. Society calls it devotion. Partners call it loyalty. But in truth, it is energetic enmeshment, and it poisons both souls involved. The awakened woman has learned to tell the difference. She no longer mistakes fusion for connection. She can sit beside someone in their pain without making it her own. She can hold space for their emotions without sacrificing her own peace. She no longer rushes to fix what was never hers to repair. Her compassion has matured. It no longer bleeds, it breathes. She has discovered a truth that changed everything. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. To love another does not mean to abandon yourself. True love honors two separate souls, each with their own lessons, their own shadows, their own journeys toward wholeness. When she finally understood this, something within her exhaled for the first time in years. The parent who calls at all hours with crises that never end. The partner who frames their wants as non-negotiable needs. The children who mistake her generosity for endless availability. Before, she opened the door to every request, convinced it was her duty. Now, she has installed an energetic gatekeeper. She chooses consciously when to open, when to remain still, and when to simply let the knocking go unanswered. To those who grew accustomed to her constant yes, this feels like betrayal. They may accuse her of coldness, of selfishness, of losing her softness. But she knows better. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. This is not rejection, but it is sacred discernment. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's consumption, and she will not be consumed anymore. She now understands that every soul must walk its own path, carry its own weight, and face its own storms. By absorbing another's suffering, she once robbed them of their own transformation. So now she lets others face the mirror of their own making. She walks beside them, but no longer walks for them. She supports without surrendering herself. In this newfound sovereignty, she feels a lightness she never knew possible. There is space inside her now. Space that used to be filled with the emotions, expectations, and disappointments of others. Where there was chaos, there is calm. Where there was exhaustion, there is breath. She realizes that peace was never the absence of noise. It was the presence of boundaries. And then comes the third line, the refusal to put her own decisions on trial. This one feels almost revolutionary, because she was conditioned from the earliest days to justify every choice, to explain why she needed rest, to apologize for wanting time alone, to rationalize her dreams until they sounded reasonable to others. She lived under the invisible rule that said, "You may act, but only if others approve." And so every decision became a courtroom performance. Every desire required a defense. She learned to speak her truth with disclaimers. I know this sounds selfish, or I just feel like maybe I need to, softening her words so no one would feel threatened by her autonomy. But the awakened woman no longer submits her choices to public debate. She has understood something vital. Sovereignty needs no witnesses. Jung wrote that the process of individuation requires the courage to live by one's inner voice, even when the outer world disagrees. The awakened woman now lives by that principle. When she makes a decision, she does so from her center, not from a need to please, convince, or win approval. She no longer confuses understanding with validation. Some people won't understand her choices because her growth threatens their stagnation, and that's fine. Her life is not a democracy. Her soul is not up for negotiation. So when someone challenges her, she no longer spirals into long explanations. She simply says, "This is my choice." Full stop. No apology, no footnotes, no extra sentences to soften the truth. This calm certainty disorients those who once relied on her defensiveness. They poke, they question, they press, but she no longer participates in the performance. She's learned that anyone who truly respects her sovereignty will never demand justification for it. Only those who wish to control her insist on explanations. Every time she over-explained, she was leaking energy. Every time she sought approval, she was handing away her power. Now she has closed those leaks. She answers from the soul, not from fear. This doesn't make her defiant. It makes her free. She no longer seeks to be agreeable. She seeks to be authentic. And in that authenticity, she finds an ease that surprises even herself. She doesn't have to fight for space anymore. Her presence claims it naturally. But this transformation does not go unnoticed. The world around her begins to shift. People who once thrived on her explanations find her silence unsettling. Those who once relied on her endless empathy feel uncomfortable around her new calm. They call her distant when in truth she is simply whole. She knows that peace will sometimes be misunderstood as indifference. That strength will be misread as arrogance. That clarity will threaten those who feed on confusion. But she no longer needs to defend her peace. She simply protects it by living it. And so a quiet reorganization begins in her life. The conversations she once endured now bore her. The people she once tried to impress no longer occupy her mind. The spaces that once demanded her compliance now feel too small to contain her. She has become her own atmosphere, and in that atmosphere only truth can breathe. When she walks into a room now, she carries a stillness that unsettles pretension, a calm that exposes manipulation, a presence that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Her silence no longer comes from suppression. It comes from power. The woman who once sought permission has disappeared. In her place stands someone unshakable, untamed, and profoundly at peace. Her decisions are no longer negotiations. They are declarations. They are the simple truth of a soul that finally trusts itself. And as she begins to live from that truth, free of emotional invasion, free of justification, she enters a realm of deep internal sovereignty. From here, the next boundary rises naturally, almost effortlessly, the one that protects her from disrespect disguised as honesty. Because when a woman reclaims her power, the world will always test her resolve. It will send subtle provocations wrapped in smiles. It will disguise contempt as humor. It will test whether her peace is performative or real. But this time she is ready. She doesn't react. She observes. She discerns. And with quiet grace, she decides who has earned the right to remain in her sacred space, and who has not. The fourth line the awakened woman guards fiercely is the one that protects her from disrespect, disguised as honesty. The world often praises bluntness, cruelty wrapped in truth, and condescension masked as just being real. But she has learned that honesty without kindness is brutality in disguise. She no longer accepts sharp words as wisdom or passive aggression as humor. Jung once said that what you do not make conscious will control you. Passive aggression, sarcasm, subtle jabs, they all live in the unconscious of those too afraid to face their own shadows. But the awakened woman sees them clearly. She recognizes when someone's harmless joke is actually a dagger dipped in charm. She feels when someone's concern is just a veiled attempt to diminish her confidence. She knows the vibration of disrespect, the way a musician knows when a note is off-key. And rather than confronting every offender, she practices the most powerful response of all, withdrawal. She no longer wastes energy trying to correct those who enjoy misunderstanding her. She doesn't explain, argue, or fight for validation. She simply removes her presence. Her silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. Her absence becomes the mirror that reflects the behavior of those who could not value her presence. She has no desire for revenge or recognition. Her dignity speaks for itself. When someone crosses her energetic threshold with mockery, manipulation, or condescension, she quietly exits. No closure, no scene, no drama, just departure. She understands that protecting her peace is more important than proving her point. If you notice her disappearing, understand this. It's not punishment, it's consequence. She no longer attends environments that can only survive on her tolerance. She no longer entertains relationships that require her silence to stay stable. Her energy is sacred, and she gives it only to those who know how to honor it. And when the world accuses her of being too sensitive, she smiles gently. Sensitivity is not a flaw. It's an instrument of discernment. The awakened woman understands that her sensitivity is her superpower. The ability to feel subtle vibrations, to sense dishonor before it becomes explicit, to hear what isn't said but meant. She no longer dulls this gift to make others comfortable. She refines it, trusts it, and lets it guide her away from false harmony. The fifth line she guards is even more profound. Protection from projection. Jung taught that when people refuse to face their own inner darkness, they cast it onto others. Families, partners, entire societies project their unowned shadows onto those most capable of feeling. The sensitive woman becomes the scapegoat, the emotional screen, the mirror everyone fears to look into. She has lived through this pattern. She remembers being blamed for the tension others caused, accused of being too emotional, labeled as the problem simply because she noticed what others wanted to ignore. She carried guilt that wasn't hers, shame that didn't belong to her, anger that originated in someone else's unresolved pain. She became a vessel for everyone's unspoken burdens. But awakening changes that. The awakened woman learns to differentiate between what is hers and what has been placed upon her. She feels when an emotion does not belong. She recognizes when guilt sneaks in without cause, when shame whispers words she never earned, when anger rises that doesn't originate in her truth. And in that moment of awareness, she refuses to carry it. "This does not belong to me," she says softly, handing back the weight that was never hers. I release it. She does this not with hostility, but with sacred clarity. It is psychic hygiene, not rejection. It is emotional maturity, not detachment. She understands that by returning others' projections to them, she is doing both souls a favor, because healing can only begin when each person carries their own emotional load. Still, this boundary is often the most misunderstood. Those who have depended on her emotional labor, her constant listening, her endless compassion, experience her refusal as betrayal. They call her heartless. They accuse her of being cold. But the awakened woman knows the truth. Love without responsibility is not love. She cannot save others by abandoning herself. And so, the relationships that once revolved around her willingness to absorb others, pain begin to dissolve. People who refuse to face themselves drift away. The ones who valued her only as a dumping ground for their chaos quietly disappear. And though it hurts, though loneliness sometimes visits, it is a clean loneliness, a sacred emptiness where her spirit can finally rest. In that space, something beautiful happens. She begins to hear her own emotions clearly, unclouded by the static of others. Her sadness feels like her sadness now, not borrowed, not inherited. Her joy is pure, her peace unpolluted. For the first time, she wakes up and knows exactly what belongs to her. This clarity feels like breathing after years underwater. It is not that she no longer cares. It's that she now loves with wisdom. She knows the difference between supporting someone and rescuing them, between empathy and absorption, between compassion and self-abandonment. With this understanding, she moves differently. Her love has boundaries. Her listening has discernment. Her presence is still warm, but it no longer burns her out. She no longer fears being misunderstood, because she knows that truth eventually reveals itself. And as she walks through life, carrying only what is truly hers, she begins to see clearly the emotional games people play, the guilt traps, the emotional blackmail, the projection loops. But instead of reacting, she simply observes. She lets others own their stories. She no longer edits herself to make others comfortable with their shadows. Her energy feels lighter now, her body freer. The headaches, the tension, the emotional fatigue that once haunted her begin to fade. She realizes that much of what she once called stress was simply the weight of other people's unresolved pain sitting inside her nervous system. Now that she no longer hosts it, her inner world feels spacious, peaceful, real. She moves through her days with calm alertness. She doesn't take things personally anymore because she understands projection for what it is, a reflection of the other person's inner state, not a measure of her worth. When someone attacks her now, she doesn't defend. She simply sees. And in that seeing, she stays grounded in her truth. She no longer takes responsibility for emotions that aren't hers. She no longer plays the role of emotional healer to those unwilling to heal themselves. This clarity transforms her relationships. The ones that remain are based on mutual respect, emotional honesty, and spiritual maturity. No more fixing, no more rescuing, no more performing, only presence. And from this sacred inner space, another boundary begins to rise, perhaps the most difficult one yet. It's the refusal to sacrifice herself for connections that require her fragmentation, the courage to walk away from relationships, families, or systems that demand her self-betrayal in the name of love. Because true love, she has learned, never asks you to abandon yourself. And any connection that does, no matter how familiar, must be released. The sixth line the awakened woman guards with quiet ferocity is her refusal to sacrifice herself for connections that demand her fragmentation. She has finally understood the ancient lie that shaped generations of women before her, that love means self-erasure, that devotion is proven by suffering, that loyalty requires her to stay, even when staying kills her spirit. Carl Jung warned about the archetype of the martyr, the one who confuses pain with purpose. The awakened woman has seen this archetype play out in her own life and in the women who came before her. She watched mothers, grandmothers, and friends dissolve themselves in the name of duty, holding families and relationships together by breaking their own hearts in silence. She once thought this was strength. Now she knows it was survival. And survival is not the same as living. She no longer seeks to keep connections alive that require her silence, her shrinking, or her emotional dismemberment. She has learned that any love that demands she betray her own soul is not love, it is captivity. If a relationship can only survive at the cost of her authenticity, it's not sacred, it's a cage. If a family bond requires her to abandon her truth to maintain peace, that peace is counterfeit. She has learned to recognize emotional prisons, even when they are built from words like loyalty, tradition, or sacrifice. She has found the courage to walk away without waiting for the other person to change, because she finally understands transformation is not her responsibility. Her only duty is to protect the integrity of her own soul. This boundary requires immense courage, because walking away from systems that once defined her identity can feel like dying. She is breaking generational contracts, unwritten pacts of silence that have bound women for centuries. And when she breaks free, she is often misunderstood. People say, "How could you leave your family?" Or "How could you turn your back on everything?" They cannot see that she is not abandoning love. She is refusing to abandon herself. What they call betrayal is in truth liberation. She knows that love without respect is not love. That relationships that depend on her suppression are not sacred bonds but energetic chains. Still, this freedom is not easy. There are nights when loneliness presses in, when the silence after leaving feels louder than the noise she escaped. But even in that silence, she senses something powerful growing, the quiet pulse of self-trust, the knowing that she has chosen truth over illusion. She no longer waits for others to understand her path. She no longer wastes energy defending her decisions. The awakened woman knows that those who truly see her will recognize her courage without explanation, and those who do not were never meant to walk beside her. This brings her to the seventh and most sacred boundary, the refusal to betray herself to keep the peace. This is the final fortress of her awakening, the line that seals her transformation. For years she believed that harmony was the highest virtue. That being good meant avoiding conflict. That love meant agreeing, complying, and smiling even when her soul was screaming. She became an expert at holding herself together while her spirit fractured inside. She said yes when every fiber of her being wanted to say no. She stayed silent to keep the atmosphere calm. She played mediator, caretaker, peacemaker, all at the expense of her own truth. And the world rewarded her for it. She was praised for being so patient, so kind, so understanding. But no one saw the quiet war she fought inside. Jung spoke of the self, the divine core within each of us that must never be betrayed. The awakened woman has come to see that every time she denied her truth to maintain outer peace, she was declaring war on that sacred core. Every time she swallowed her words to keep others comfortable, she was silencing her soul. She will never do it again. She understands now that false peace is far more destructive than honest conflict, that every unspoken truth becomes a toxin in the body, a heaviness in the heart. She would rather face temporary discomfort than live in permanent self-betrayal. So now, when a moment of truth arrives, when her intuition speaks, when her heart trembles with knowing, she listens, even if it costs her approval. Even if it changes everything, even if it means standing alone. And something miraculous begins to happen when this final boundary is anchored. The universe starts rearranging itself around her frequency. People who require her silence quietly fade away. Circumstances that depended on her compliance dissolve. Environments that once thrived on her self-abandonment can no longer hold her vibration. It is not punishment, it is purification. The life that remains is smaller but real. What leaves was never truly hers. Her social circle shrinks. The invitations stop coming. Family dynamics shift and sometimes collapse. And yet, amidst all the loss, she feels lighter, freer, more whole than she has ever been. Because she has stopped living for acceptance and started living in alignment. Yes, there are moments of doubt. Moments when she wonders if she's gone too far. If maybe she's become selfish, too detached, too different. But then she feels it, that deep, quiet certainty in her chest, the peace that can only exist when your soul is no longer at war with itself. And in that peace, she realizes this is not selfishness. This is self-preservation in its purest form. This is the sacred return to herself. The awakened woman who has anchored these 7 boundaries no longer moves through the world in defense. She moves with presence. There's a softness to her strength, a calm power in her silence. She doesn't need to announce her standards. Her energy communicates them. People sense what is permissible and what is not before a word is spoken. Those who cannot honor her truth find no access to her, not because she is cold, but because she has become energetically sovereign. Her presence itself is her protection. There is a vast difference between a woman constantly trying to set boundaries and a woman who simply is the boundary. The first is negotiating. The second is emanating. The first explains. The second embodies. She no longer fears solitude. The silence that once terrified her has become her sanctuary. She has learned that it is far better to be alone in truth than surrounded by those who demand her self-betrayal. In her solitude, she finds expansion. In her quiet, she finds wisdom. And in her own reflection, she finds the home she had been seeking in everyone else. And when she finally stops bending, she begins attracting souls who have no desire to bend her. When she stops carrying projections, she meets people who own their shadows. When she stops betraying her truth, she finds relationships where truth is celebrated, not feared. Her world becomes smaller, yes, but infinitely deeper. Every connection becomes sacred, every word intentional, every silence holy. This journey is not without cost. It has demanded everything from her: comfort, belonging, illusions of love. It has burned away the versions of herself that others once adored. But what she has gained is priceless: her wholeness, her dignity, her peace. The awakened woman is not angry. Her past rage was only the voice of violated boundaries. Now that her boundaries are whole, her anger has no purpose. She has become calm, not from surrender, but from mastery. That calm is magnetic. It draws what aligns and repels what doesn't. It is the natural vibration of a soul that is no longer for sale. Perhaps you feel this awakening stirring within you. Perhaps you are standing at the threshold, feeling the old structures crumble. Trust that feeling. It is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within yourself. These boundaries are not walls. They are sacred architecture. They define the space where your soul can breathe. They mark the return to yourself. The quiet revolution of a woman who has decided, never again will I sacrifice my truth. Never again will I trade authenticity for approval. Never again will I allow my sacred lines to be crossed. Because once a woman truly awakens, she is no longer seeking permission. She is walking home to herself. If these words spoke to something inside you, if you felt seen, understood, or awakened in any way, then this space was created for you. Subscribe now, not just to follow another channel, but to join a movement of women reclaiming their truth, their peace, and their power. Every week we explore the quiet revolutions of the soul, boundaries, healing, awakening, and becoming who you were always meant to be. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss these moments of truth and transformation. Because this isn't just content. It's a home for your awakening.